Colossians 1, 7 through 12, seeing the will of God. The objective nature of the will of God. Colossians 1, 7 through 14 says, as you also learned from Epaphras, our dear fellow servant, who is for you a faithful minister of Christ, who has declared unto us your love in the Spirit. For this cause we also, since the day you heard of it, do not cease to pray for you and to desire that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will in all wisdom and spiritual understanding, that you may walk worthily of the Lord unto all pleasing, being fruitful in every good work, and increasing in the knowledge of God, strengthened with all might according to his glorious power, unto all patience and long-suffering with joy. Paul is praying because now the evidence of the divine life is there. There's a church there, and it is real. They have the love, the Spirit, and the faith towards Jesus Christ. Now, he starts praying that they would be filled with the full knowledge of his will in all wisdom and spiritual understanding. The phrase, his will, in the apostle's mind, is a singular thing. It's not, I hope you know what the will of your God. It's not, I hope you know the will of God for your life so that you can execute the plan of God for your life and have a meaningful life because it's all about you. That's not it. I've spent so much time in Christianity seeking God's will for my life and hearing messages about how you need to find God's will for your life. When people say that, they make it into an elusive thing and turn it into a work. Then you don't feel complete and you feel like you're lacking. Colossians is a book that teaches us how we are complete in Christ and lack nothing. Colossians 2:10. God's will is not what it is that God is wanting you to do. His will is a vision of what he is doing in the universe. That's what he's focused on revealing, especially in Ephesians and Colossians. There's only one hope of your calling, Ephesians 4:4. Paul's prayer in Ephesians is that you would receive the spirit of wisdom and revelation, and that the eyes of your heart would be enlightened so that you may know what is the hope of his calling, Ephesians 1:17 and 18. This is a singular hope having to do with his intention to head up the universe in Christ and make him central, as we'll see. So, first Paul prays that you would be filled with the full knowledge of his will. Then he begins to describe the will of God to us. Again, the emphasis is not what you need to find out about God's will for your life, which then becomes a works burden. This is not about you. This is about all of us, and it's really focused on Christ. All of us need to be standing here staring at the same vision. He tells us that this is the source of walking worthily of the Lord to please him. To walk in a way that's compatible with the way that God would have you walk means that you understand the way God thinks and what he wants. That just swings your whole life into alignment with him spontaneously. Maturity by vision. In Hebrews, I talked about the difference between our position and the future Israelites under the new covenant. There is a difference. There's another difference. In the new covenant, he writes his law in their heart and mind and causes them to walk in his ways. He used to come to the Old Testament saints and overcome them in work, but here it's different. It's vision. It's enlightenment. It's him shining on you and you being unveiled to behold him and to see what he is. This produces a maturity in you so that your desires, your affections, and your being is impacted and you want what he wants. You spontaneously live a life that is pleasing to him because you are a son of God. This is higher than being a servant. This is being a son in the image of God who wants what he wants, likes what he likes, loves what he loves, and hates what he hates. Whatever you encounter in your life, you realize he is the sovereign Lord who is the one who's arranged everything for you. He has set you before and behind, Psalm 139:5, and his hand is upon you. He's gone before you. He's prepared your way. There's nothing that you're going to encounter as a son of God that is not sovereignly allowed by the Father. Your response to it will be in his image to the degree that you have the knowledge of his will. He brings things into your life just to put it all on display, that you may walk worthy of the Lord to all pleasing, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. Colossians 1:10. I will come back to this. When the apostle talks about being filled with the knowledge of his will, he's talking about God's purpose, what God is doing in the universe, why we exist, and where we're headed. Ephesians says that we are all saved in one hope of our calling, and that he prayed that God would enlighten the eyes of our hearts, that we would have a spirit of wisdom and revelation. This phrase, in all wisdom and spiritual understanding, shows up in Ephesians as well, where he says in Ephesians 1:8 through 10, according to the riches of his grace, which he's abounded towards us in all wisdom and spiritual understanding, having made known to us the mystery of his will, unto his good pleasure, which he purposed in himself, that in the dispensation of the fullness of times he might gather in one all things in Christ, both which are in heaven and on earth, even as in him. According to these verses, the riches of God's grace have abounded toward us, have been lavished on us in wisdom and spiritual understanding through the knowledge of his will. Here it's called the mystery of his will. Mystery in the New Testament refers to something that's previously hidden, but now is being revealed. God's will was a mystery hidden in his counsel until after the resurrection of Christ, and now it is openly declared and made known to all the sons of God. However, it does take insight, spiritual wisdom, and understanding to see it, and God's grace furnishes this to us. God's grace does so much more than just bring us the forgiveness of sins. Everything we receive now throughout eternity will be a result of grace, which is really just the resurrected Christ himself. One of the main things God desires for us to have is wisdom and understanding to know the mystery of his will. According to Ephesians 1:10, this is that in the dispensation or the administration of the fullness of times he might gather together all things in Christ, in one, in the heavens and on the earth. This gathering of all things into Christ is called heading up in some translations. I like heading up because it connects the concept that he is the head of the body and head over all things to the church, so I'll be using that phrase often in this study. God's administration to head up all things in Christ. To sum it up, there's an administration of the fullness of the times to head up all things in Christ. As you look at the whole Bible, you will see that God created everything in Christ and God created everything for Christ. God created everything by Christ and God upholds everything through Christ. Colossians 1:16-17. He has made Christ his Son, his beloved Son, the heir of all things. Hebrews 1:2. Everything is created for him. There's been a problem with this from the beginning. The angels didn't like it. They tried to rebel, which caused the universe to collapse. God created man and gave him dominion, and man was brought into sin, and man collapsed. Then, after the flood, beginning with Abraham, God began to call people out of collapsed humanity to be brought into his kingdom. He promised them the land and the seed. Ultimately, the seed is Christ. He's the seed of Abraham and the seed of David. In Hebrews, we saw that the good land is also a picture of Christ with all of his abundant riches to be our inheritance forever. When the seed came, Christ, who was really the heir to all the promises God had ever made to humanity, he was born into humanity. In his death and resurrection, God raised that human being up and seated him in his own throne in the heavens, where he waits for his enemies to be made a footstool. Hebrews 1:13. In resurrection, he has also become the head over all things to the church. Ephesians 1:22. This is the vehicle through which he's going to reconcile everything in heaven and on earth and bring it together in Christ. Everything will be wrought under the rule of Christ. However, in the church, his lordship is not just a matter of outward authority. He rules the church by being the very life of the members and teaching the members to, quote, live Christ. Philippians 1:21. Ultimately, Christ will fill all things in a way in that the new heavens and the new earth, there won't be a separation between God and his creation. Christ will deliver the kingdom to the Father, and God will be all in all. 1 Corinthians 15:28. Everything will be brought into the headship, and everything will be filled with God himself, and he will permeate everything in Christ, primarily through the church, which is his body, the fullness of him that fills all in all. Ephesians 1:23. That is the headship. That's the culmination of the administration of the fullness of times to head up all things in Christ. There's an infinite amount of detail to this purpose, so this is a high-level overview of what God is doing in the universe, in Christ and the church. This administration is carried out in stages. He had to separate people out and prepare them for his promise. Eventually, the seed came to whom everything was promised, Christ. He's the seed of the woman, the seed of Abraham, and the seed of David. All of those titles allude to generations of people who waited on God and believed in his promise and his covenants. All these covenants and promises were related to the seed, which is Christ, in whom all their faith, hope, and desire rested. When Christ came, incarnated, died, resurrected, and gave his life for his believers, God began attaching people directly to the head through that life. Now that he's in resurrection, we have become members of his body, which is his fullness, through which he will fill all things with himself. Ephesians 1:23. The church is the first to be headed up in Christ. As members of the church, we are the first to really be headed up in Christ. Everything in the universe eventually will be headed up, and he still has cleanup work to do. We know about the tribulation, the bringing of Israel into the land and renewing her, bringing her kingdom, and the 1,000-year reign of Christ in his church. Then at the end of that age, Satan will be cast into the lake of fire, as well as death and hell and all those who didn't believe. All who did believe, even during the time of the millennium, will be brought into the new heavens and the new earth. God will fold this one up and bring about a new one in which righteousness dwells. There will be no more sin, sickness, or sorrow. Everything will be headed up in Christ, and all of this is accomplished by the power of his resurrection. We are the first fruits of Christ's resurrection, having been begotten of God's own seed. We are being headed up in Christ's body, and we're really the vehicle through which he's going to fill everything with himself. That's why we're called the fullness of him who fills all in all. In God's mind, Christ as the head and his members as the body are all one. It's all one corporate person, a new man that does not exist as a group of independent members, but a group of people who live in Christ as he is in us. We are the same as him in life and nature, destined to inherit his glory and be his expression. We will be the expression of God forever. We will be the outward appearance as the new city, Jerusalem, and God will be the content of that city. There will always be a distinction between God and his creation. However, we've been brought into God and he's being brought into us and building himself into us so that we are his permanent, fixed habitation and expression. This is our destiny. This is a high-level overview, but in a nutshell, this is what God revealed through Paul's writings, especially concerning the will of God. Knowing the will of God means having a vision of what God is doing in the universe. That vision shines a light on you and becomes something that regulates you, whether you realize it or not. This is something where you realize you're being caught up into God's story and he's accomplishing his purpose, and you've been swept along into his flow. The more you have that vision, your whole life will swing into harmony with it. Automatically, knowing the will of God brings you into harmony with God. It causes you to love what he loves, hate what he hates, and walk in a way that's pleasing with him.